The Trump administration is now admitting they made their words, administrative error when they deported a Maryland father with protected status to an El Salvador mega prison. Now he's stuck there in the very country he was trying to flee, with the administration arguing there's nothing that can be done to get him out now. His lawyer tells NBC News he was arrested by ICE with his 5-year-old autistic child in the back seat of his car in Maryland. His wife later recognized him in the video from the prison in El Salvador. Now, the Trump administration says this was all an oversight, but they write his removal was carried out in good faith based on the existence of a final order of removal and his purported membership in MS-13. A hearing on this has been scheduled for Friday. Tim Miller is back with us. I also want to bring in Alan Orr, immigration attorney. Here in studio, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Do we know, Lisa, how this happened?
We don't exactly know how it happened. You mentioned that he has a final order of removal, but what he also had was an order expressing that he could not be removed in some period of time because he feared retribution in his country of origin. He could not be sent to El Salvador. So it was as if that order of removal was on an indefinite pause. Given that, his lawyers say the country was not at liberty to send him anywhere at this moment, and therefore we don't know how this happened at all, Chris.
Are there really no options for the administration if they want to say, oops, let's get him back?
No, if they want to get him back, there are legal recourse that they can take. For example, they could have appealed the order that puts sort of that indefinite pause on his being removed for the country, but they didn't do that. What they can't do is sort of override that simply because they feel like they should or they can, and they certainly can't bring him to the side of the road and tell him his status has changed, when in fact that's not the case, as Alan can tell you.
So Alan, his lawyer did tell The Atlantic this, I'm going to quote here. They claim that the court is powerless to order any relief. If that's true, the immigration laws are meaningless, all of them, because the government can deport whoever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want, and no court can do anything about it once it's done. So a twofold question. Is there nothing the government can do to get back this man? Or just generally, how do you see this?
So let's start with, we're paying them $6 million. So in that we're paying them $6 million, I think that's a lot of leverage to get an individual back to the country if we wanted to. And as we've talked to Canada and Greenland, this conversation about sovereignty really doesn't hold with me right now in this moment where they're saying there's nothing they can do against El Salvador's sovereignty, specifically when we're paying them $6 million. Secondly, withholding without removal is something that should not be an administrative error or something that is a political junction. It is not only illegal, it is also inhumane. This person may die, a child may lose his father, and a woman may lose her husband. And those things cannot be repaired easily. And I feel like they may even have a big civil suit. So it is as if ICE and the Justice Department that gave him the order of removal are not all part of the Department of Justice. This was all done under one department that said he had a cancellation, withholding of removal, which is basically the same thing as that he should not be removed from the country. If they'd have looked at his identification that he had, it would have indicated in his status. We know that he was arrested one day and removed 2 days later. It is the haste to run up the numbers that is costing us justice and due process. How you do anything is how you do everything. And that's why we have so many errors right now in these deportations.
Well, Tim, the concern over these roundups isn't limited to the left or legal experts. I want you to listen to Joe Rogan. Of course, he's got a conservative podcast, most popular in the country, 14 million monthly listeners. Here's what he said.
The thing is, like, you got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting, like, lassoed up and deported and sent to, like, El Salvador prisons.
I think a human being being plucked out of nowhere and ending up in a country he's never been in a maximum security prison with gang members, seems like a bad thing to happen to me.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
I don't think that should be controversial.
No, that's not controversial at all.
He almost seems, Tim, to be framing this as not just a political issue, but a moral one.
Yeah, I played that very quick yesterday myself on the podcast because, look, I think that it's important. We're seeing a lot of cowardice, I think, from our political leaders. I mean, obviously, the Republicans are not standing up to this administration at all. You have the Vice President, J.D. Vance, making false accusations today on social media, saying that this man from Maryland was convicted of being MS-13. There was no such conviction. The vice president is lying about this. There was one accusation. In a free country, in a liberal democracy, there's a difference between accusation and conviction. When someone makes an accusation, you can go to a court, you have due process, you can hire an attorney like one of my co-panelists to defend you. None of that happened here. And this person just has, by an admitted mistake, been disappeared into this prison where he can't contact a lawyer, he can't contact his family. And it is very un-American. And I think the fact that somebody like Joe Rogan sees this so clearly and can speak to the moral valence of this and just say, this is not our country, this is not America, this is horrific to do this. If this person is in fact a gang member, then you have to prove it. And at that point, fine, send her to jail. I think everybody would agree with that. So I was happy Rogan said that. I don't have any hope that any Republicans are going to stand up to this administration, but I would hope that Democrats, who are maybe been a little cautious to weigh in on this because immigration is an issue that's worked against them in a variety of ways, might say, okay, well, look, if Joe Rogan can have moral clarity on this, I think all the Democrats should be able to as well.
Well, Ellen, I have to say, as we've watched some of these actually play out on video, right? We've seen some people taken into custody. I'm thinking about students into custody, and there's protests being made, and they're trying to present facts. The people who are rounding them up are just saying, I have an order to round you up. But in this case, for example, should the administration have known, to your point about haste, before they said, go get this guy, that he had the documentation he had, that he had the protections he had?
Of course, just like a police officer, when they stop, you can see if your license are valid or not valid. It's a very clear thing to see. But even more on the protocol, under former administrations, if someone was caught with a minor, a 5-year-old minor, they would not be detained for the health of the U.S. minor who has autistic problems. So the fact that this father was removed in front of a U.S. citizen disabled kid is going to alarm that kid for the rest of their lives. And I don't know to what level of freedom and speed and safety that actually reaches for us.
You mentioned, Tim, whether or not other Republicans, may feel the same as Joe Rogan. And I do wonder how a lot of let's say middle-of-the-road voters are viewing this. Vice President Vance was on X summarizing what has been, I think, a major defense by the administration. He wrote, quote, "It's gross to get fired up about gang members getting deported while ignoring citizens they victimize." And this was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
You are questioning the credibility of these agents who are putting their life on the line to protect your life and the life of everybody in this group and everybody across the country.
So pushing back, no proof about these folks, that they have any criminal record, that they've done anything wrong. But I'm thinking about, for example, the makeup artist whose crime seems to be having tattoos. Are the American people buying it, do you think, the arguments that we're hearing from a J.D. Vance and Caroline Leavitt?
Yeah, just briefly on the substance. Look, again, J.D. Vance's statement there is, again, a lie. There's no evidence this person victimized anybody. Again, it's one thing if this is a gang member and there's evidence that they have victimized somebody, then great, punish that person. Everybody agrees with that. Like this man, no evidence has been presented by the government that he victimized anybody. He's been here 14 years. He came as a teenager fleeing gang violence, has no criminal record besides a couple speeding tickets, which JD mentioned in another tweet, as if that is justification that he has speeding tickets to send him to a gulag in another country. It's insane. As far as whether this lands with the American people, again, I think that there's the American people are probably against the Democrats on some of the other immigration policies on the border over the past few years. But this individual rights, we saw a poll from CBS and The Economist that said that a majority of Americans were opposed to these deportations with no due process. That same poll said only 32% of Republicans thought that all of the people that were deported were probably gang members, that there were a couple of mistakes. So I think this is something that could land with the American people if people actually make the case on the merits, rather than shying away from it.
I'm going to get in trouble with my producer who told me to wrap. But Lisa Rubin, when I see you taking notes, I think I have to ask you to have the last word.
Well, this isn't the first mistake that they've made, and whether they acknowledge it or not, the ACLU has submitted a slew of affidavits in the Venezuelan Alien Enemies Act case from people who say that mistakes were made. 2 of those come from a Venezuelan woman and a Nicaraguan man who say they were caught up in these flights. And I expect that we'll hear from others. Our own Julie Ainsley has a report tonight on NBC Nightly where she's going to talk to 2 of those women who were taken erroneously as part of these flights taken to El Salvador. I expect that in the coming days at hearings before Judge Boasberg, you may see a little bit more contrition from the U.S. government, in part because the facts demand that they'll have to acknowledge further errors, Chris.
Lisa Rubin, Tim Miller, Alan Orr, thank you very much.